Philippines, please welcome Eala.
500,000 people, one website, one crash. On April, Roland Garros opened its last 22nd 2026.
The organizers need to keep more in mind where the players are from and what the actual fan base is here, because there's massive Filipino audience. Keep that in mind next time you make the schedule.
Nearly 500,000 fans descended on it simultaneously, collapsing the official French Open servers within seconds.
I love the Filipino fans too, and I feel a little bit adopted when I play doubles with her.
Online, the digital carnage was instantaneous, with shell-shocked fans on social media comparing the ticket portals collapse directly to the infamous Taylor Swift era's Tour Ticketmaster disaster. And the truly mind-blowing realization is that all of this unprecedented digital hysteria occurred weeks before Eala had even swung a single racket or played a single competitive ball in Paris. By the time the technical dust finally settled, and the servers were forced back online, the financial reality of her massive drawing power became undeniably clear, with VIP box seats on secondary ticket markets rapidly listing for astronomical figures up to $2,000 for early opening round sessions. Let that sink in for a moment. We are not talking about the prestigious tournament final, nor are we talking about the high-stakes semifinals. This was explicitly for round one. Meanwhile, the young woman standing at the absolute center of that massive financial detonation was still, in her very own humble words, trying to desperately convince herself that any of this was actually real. But here is exactly what makes this particular year fundamentally different from every single tennis season that came before it. Eala arrives at Roland Garros 2026 not just as a standard participant, but as an officially seeded player. This marks the historic first time in her professional career that she has held that protected status at a Grand Slam tournament. Make no mistake, this is not a minor footnote or a simple statistical curiosity. Seeding is the tennis institution's formal, ultimate acknowledgement that a player truly belongs among the absolute elite of the sport, indicating that her international ranking demands structural protection within the tournament draw. Furthermore, this particular clay court of Roland Garros holds an immense personal weight for her that goes far beyond simple ranking points or monetary prizes. Back in 2021, Eala triumphantly captured the Roland Garros junior doubles title on these exact historic grounds. She first conquered this beautiful city as a determined teenager, and now she returns to it as a mature, seasoned professional while 500,000 people simultaneously tried to break the internet just to secure a chance to watch her play. The high-stakes match she is walking directly into on Sunday, May 24th, is a formidable clash against Iva Jovic, the world number 17. Jovic is a genuine teenage prodigy who stunned the tennis world by reaching the Australian Open quarterfinals in January of 2026, making her the youngest American player to achieve such a feat since the legendary Venus Williams did so back in 1998. This is absolutely not a routine walkover or an easy introduction to the tournament. This is a first-round match carrying the raw electric energy of a Grand Slam quarterfinal, and the hyperreactive ticket market figured that out long before the official draw was even announced to the public. The traditional tennis system was simply never built to handle what Eala represents. Roland Garros has historically relied on a rigid lottery ticketing structure that, by its very design, systematically turns away 90 to 95% of the hopeful fans who register. Historically, that high failure rate was deemed tolerable by organizers because ticket demand usually arrived in predictable, manageable waves tightly tied to official seedings, daily draws, and player progression. It is completely intolerable now because the global demand for Eala does not patiently wait for the official draw to drop. It does not wait for a formal court assignment. It does not wait for a synchronized match schedule. The demand arrived in full force on April 22nd, weeks before the actual tournament was even scheduled to begin, crashing the central servers before a single seed was ever placed into the brackets. The restrictive 30-minute browsing limit that Roland Garros hastily implemented as an emergency damage control measure, the agonizing 15-minute cart countdown, and the endless cascade of furious fans abruptly expelled from the digital queue before they could complete their purchases are not just minor inconveniences. They stand as documented, historical evidence of a traditionalist sporting institution scrambling frantically to manage a cultural phenomenon it never anticipated. A player ranked number 38 worldwide generating the exact kind of overwhelming digital crush that typically belongs exclusively to a Grand Slam final. When official ticketing channels predictably failed, the secondary resale market responded with a ruthless, capitalizing efficiency. VIP box seats for the premier Philippe Chatrier sessions during the tournament were reportedly listed starting from $1,500, rapidly climbing past the $2,000 mark for the specific sessions where Eala was anticipated to appear. These are prices that in the long history of the secondary ticket market have historically belonged strictly to the quarterfinals week, not the opening rounds of a tournament. Crucially, the people profiting from this massive financial gap are not the organizers of Roland Garros, nor are they her elite competitors. They are the independent ticket brokers who recognized her immense commercial gravity long before the formal tennis institution did. The ongoing court assignment question is far from a theoretical debate, either. At the 2026 Australian Open, just 4 short months ago, major publications like the New York Times and The Athletic ran specific analytical pieces questioning whether Grand Slams urgently need to rethink how they assign show courts, pointing directly at the intense institutional tension between traditional rankings and the massive, overflowing crowds she commanded on Court 6. Roland Garros has not publicly resolved this pressing question for the 2026 edition, but 2 full days before the first competitive ball was even struck on May 22, passionate fans were already completely flooding Court 4 just to watch her practice. Not to watch her play an official match, but simply to watch her practice. The Great Crash of April 22, 2026, where 500,000 people hit the refresh button at the exact same cosmic second, remains a documented, verified historical number, confirmed directly by Roland Garros' own official Instagram account and widely reported by reputable outlets like The Big Lead and MSN Sports. The frequent online comparison to the Taylor Swift-era's tour ticketing crisis did not originate from a sensationalist tabloid column. It came directly from everyday sports fans who had lived through both stressful digital cues and instantly recognized the identical pattern of overwhelming demand. When was the absolute last time a first-round women's singles match generated a digital siege of that massive scale? The honest, unfiltered answer is that it has simply never happened in the recorded history of professional tennis until now. The online crash was not the mechanical result of an exceptional top 4 seeding placement or the protective halo of a defending champion. She was not yet formally confirmed on the grand stage of Philippe Chatrier, court assignments had not been finalized, and the official draw had not even been made public to the world. The fan demand was entirely unconditional. 500,000 people came for her specifically without needing to know a single structural detail first. Consider the practice crowd on May 22, 2026, the bustling Monday of tournament week just 2 days before her opening match. She was assigned to Court 4, not a main show court, not a massive stadium with 50 television cameras pointed at it, just humble Court 4. Yet the ABS-CBN Sports Desk ran it as a standalone breaking headline. Fans flocked to Eala's Roland Garros practice session. Think about the reality of that situation. Nobody buys an expensive international flight to Paris just to witness a standard warm-up rally. Nobody stands 3 rows deep against an auxiliary chain-link fence in the intense morning heat just to watch a player hit routine ground strokes at 70% capacity, except for her dedicated fanbase. Put yourself for a second in the shoes of the player standing on the other side of the net during that intense practice session. You are a professional training partner or a skilled hitting partner simply doing a job, and yet the gallery behind the fence is completely packed to maximum capacity. They are not there for you, nor are they there for a high-stakes match, but rather for a 20-year-old talent from the Philippines in the middle of a standard warm-up routine. That is no longer just a passionate fan club, that is pure cultural gravity. This brings us to the profound peer witness of Amanda Anisimova in Dubai, 2026. This is exactly where the narrative stops being a mere argument about digital numbers and ticket metrics and becomes something far harder for traditional critics to dismiss. During Eala's match in Dubai earlier this year, Amanda Anisimova, who enters this Roland Garros heavily seeded at number 6, a firmly established WTA top 10 player with immense match preparation demands of her own, voluntarily chose to sit directly in the public stands just to watch. It was not for strategic scouting, nor because she was scheduled to play the winner of that match. She stayed in those stands because, in her own direct, unfiltered words, she stuck around for it because the atmosphere was just so incredibly great. Going even further into her interpretation, Anisimova openly praised her, calling Eala such a wonderful and proud representation of her country, adding that she is so remarkably young and yet carries herself so beautifully well on the global stage. This high praise was completely unprompted. No probing journalist had asked Anisimova to evaluate Eala's national significance or cultural impact. She offered it entirely on her own accord. When a current top 10 player in the world voluntarily transitions into an ordinary audience member at your match, and then freely offers a glowing character assessment that nobody even asked for, your cultural footprint has crossed a profound threshold that tennis rankings alone can never hope to measure. This undeniable pattern reveals itself tournament by tournament. This is absolutely not an isolated Roland Garros anomaly. The statistical and cultural record remains entirely consistent across every single tournament she has entered throughout this historic 2026 season. In Auckland, the massive crowds gathered instantly. At the Australian Open, Court 6 overflowed to a dangerous degree, prompting the New York Times to cover it extensively. Across Abu Dhabi, Doha and Dubai, sports journalists documented unprecedented fan surges. At Indian Wells, an ABS-CBN broadcast formally named this phenomenon the global Eala effect in a dedicated video segment that rapidly accumulated over 40,000 views within hours. Even at Stuttgart's prestigious Porsche Grand Prix, the entire attendance pattern of the tournament shifted dramatically following her official entry into the main draw. Every single venue, every distinct playing surface, and every different time zone reflects the exact same reality. This clear pattern spanning over 11 months is no mere coincidence. It is a consistent, powerful directional force that has been steadily building since the dawn of this year, finally reaching its absolute loudest and most undeniable expression on the historic red clay of Paris. This is the ultimate fan validation moment. For those of you who have been occupying these stands, whether physically in the stadiums or digitally across streaming platforms, since long before the mainstream media sports networks finally took notice, you already knew this historic moment was inevitably coming. While major television networks were still casually deciding where to position their primary cameras, you were already locked in and watching her journey unfold. The rest of the sporting world is only now frantically catching up to what you deeply understood months ago, that this massive level of global attention is not artificially manufactured, nor is it inflated by a single viral social media moment. It has been earned through a continuous, authentic, and volcanic pattern of fan engagement that never switches off between tournaments. To truly understand the gravity of this moment, we must look back to November 2024, when the legendary Rafael Nadal officially retired from professional tennis, leaving behind a legacy of 14 historic Roland Garros titles and the most decorated clay court career in the entire history of human sport. His emotional retirement felt like the definitive end of an era. Yet months later, when Nadal finally returned to a tennis court for the very first time since stepping away from the tour, he needed a partner for his first competitive practice hit, his monumental reintroduction to the sport he had personally defined for 2 decades. He stepped onto the pristine courts of his very own elite academy in Manaker, Mallorca, and out of all the players in the world, he chose Alex Eala. Not a top 10 veteran, not an established Grand Slam champion, but the 20-year-old force from the Philippines who trains diligently at his academy. Eala vividly described that unforgettable experience in an emotional interview with The National, stating that it was completely crazy, marking her first time ever hitting balls with him, leaving her incredibly nervous and physically demanded, noting that even though he had been off the court for a year while she had been training incredibly strong, she still felt so far from his level, but considered it an unmatched experience to truly absorb all of that legendary knowledge. Concluding that just to say you hit with Rafa is insane, leaving her feeling profoundly lucky and blessed. 14 Roland Garros titles, and he made one definitive choice for his historic first practice session back. There is no elaborate press conference statement, no highly produced podcast endorsement, and no corporate promotional campaign that could ever carry the immense structural weight of that single, quiet decision. Rafael Nadal communicates almost entirely through deliberate actions, and his actions on that day said absolutely everything. Now she arrives at his absolute cathedral Roland Garros, the sacred red clay that bears the permanent imprint of his legendary career, entering the gates as a seeded professional player, while the secondary ticket market aggressively prices her opening sessions at 4 distinct figures. The undisputed king of clay did not launch a monumental comeback from retirement just to hit tennis balls with anyone. What is unfolding across Paris right now is far from a localized sports story. It represents the highly visible leading edge of a massive structural shift that the WTA has not yet formally addressed, and one that professional tennis as a whole cannot afford to ignore for much longer. Southeast Asia, home to over 700 million people with rapidly growing middle classes and a well-documented hunger for a defining sports identity, has historically been treated as a peripheral, secondary market by the traditional tennis establishment. The commercial architecture of professional tennis was built almost entirely around Western Europe and North America. However, Eala's powerful presence at Roland Garros 2026, alongside the brilliant Janice Tijen of Indonesia, who recently became the first Indonesian woman to break into the global top 50 since Yeuk Basuki did so back in 1998, signals the definitive arrival of that massive Southeast Asian market at the sport's most prestigious and historic address. The fans are no longer content remaining on the periphery. They are actively crashing the central servers. The pressing popularity premium, question that the New York Times initially raised back in January, has now transformed into an urgent Paris question. Should court assignments at prestigious Grand Slams directly reflect a player's true commercial gravity alongside their numerical ranking? The global ticket market has already cast its definitive vote. $2,000 for VIP box seats during her scheduled sessions is a clear market-generated answer. While the WTA and the organizers of Roland Garros have maintained a cautious public silence, that institutional silence cannot possibly hold for much longer. The upcoming matchup calendar makes this specific moment even more monumental. If she successfully defeats Jovic on Sunday, she will enter a highly competitive section of the tournament draw that includes the world #1 seed Aryna Sabalenka, and looming in that very same quarter, Coco Gauff, the formidable defending Roland Garros champion. A potential quarterfinal clash between the reigning French Open title holder and the young player who is entirely redefining what a modern tennis fanbase looks like in 2026 would easily be the most commercially explosive, highly anticipated women's quarterfinal Roland Garros has staged in recent history. It is highly advised to watch the upcoming Wimbledon and US Open draws with that massive matchup potential firmly in mind, as the stakes are clearly building well beyond this opening round. Yet, the path here was filled with raw grit. Just 3 days before her historic Roland Garros first-round match, she suffered a tough loss in Strasbourg. Her opponent on that day was not a top seed, nor was she an established player at all, but rather Oleksandra Oleinikova, a fiercely determined Ukrainian qualifier. It was a grueling 3-set clay court defeat in her final tune-up tournament right before the French Open. This is the unglamorous part of professional sports that never makes the highlight reels. A quiet, difficult loss on a minor clay court in France just 72 hours before the biggest clay court event on the global calendar. In Rome just a single week earlier, she had brilliantly defeated Olympic silver medalist Wang Xinyu with a commanding 6-4, 6-3 scoreline, only to run directly into a tough loss against Elena Rybakina, a formidable former French Open champion in the very next round. From the courts of Rome she traveled straight to Strasbourg, suffered that unexpected loss to a qualifier, and then immediately arrived at Roland Garros. She was out on court 4 on May 22nd, the very morning after arriving in the city, hitting intense ground strokes in front of a massive crowd that had literally traveled from an entirely different continent just to watch her warm up. There was no dramatic statement posted to social media about the Strasbourg setback. There was only the dedicated work, racket held firmly in hand, red clay beneath her feet, and the beautiful noise of passionate people who flew to Paris specifically, because she was going to be on that court. Earlier this year in Rome, she insightfully remarked that she is steadily finding her footing and knows deep down that she can do exceptionally well, stating that she is a much better player both physically and mentally than she was last year, emphasizing that her team and her have been working incredibly hard with the hope that the specific elements they have practiced will reflect brilliantly on her game. That is exactly what true accountability and elite maturity sound like at just 20 years old. No convenient excuses, no defensive deflections, just the quiet, absolute certainty of an athlete who knows the hard work is far from finished, showing up the next morning to perform in front of a passionate crowd that literally crashed a major website just to be there. Think about the sheer weight of these receipts. 500,000 people crashing the official website before the draw was even set, secondary market VIP tickets skyrocketing to $2,000. A reigning top 10 player voluntarily sitting in the public stands just to absorb the electric crowd energy, and the greatest clay court champion in history choosing her as his definitive comeback partner. At the absolute center of this whirlwind stands a composed 20-year-old from Quezon City, quietly telling the world that she was initially a little in denial. The rest of the world, however, is not in denial. What is unfolding at Roland Garros 2026 is something the sport's traditional infrastructure was never designed to contain. She has not merely entered the French Open as a proudly seated player. She has arrived as the single most culturally consequential presence at this entire tournament, completely regardless of her seed number, her ranking, or what a first-round history record might say. The crashed server, the completely flooded practice courts, and the 4-figure resale prices are not speculative predictions. They are hard, verified receipts generated before she has hit a single competitive ball in this fortnight's tournament. Looking back, a sense of retrospective inevitability demands one honest admission: the signs were always right there. Every single packed practice court, every overflowing spectator gallery, and every tournament director quietly recalculating crowd capacity pointed to this exact moment. This historic milestone was always the final destination. Paris just made it absolutely impossible for the world to look away. Here is the ultimate question worth actively debating right now. If she successfully reaches the quarterfinals and faces down Coco Gauff, the defending Roland Garros champion, inside the iconic Philippe Chatrier Stadium, should the tournament organizers be structurally obligated to place that monumental match on the main show court regardless of traditional seating protocols? And would you personally pay $2,000 to secure a seat in that stadium if they did? Drop your thoughts and answers below because that major conversation starts right now, and the next few rounds are going to completely force this sport to make a definitive choice. If you want to stay deeply embedded in this conversation before the traditional tennis institution finally catches up, and before Roland Garros officially figures out the massive cultural phenomenon it has on its hands, make sure to subscribe to this channel immediately. We are dedicated to covering every single one of her matches, every controversial court assignment decision, and every major ticket market move throughout this exciting fortnight. This historic story is far from over. It is only just beginning in the very first round.